Kareem Nelson taking us into this edition of Beyond the Headlines, brought to you with the kind compliments and flow. On Beyond the Headlines, we provide review and analysis of the big story. The big story over the last 24 to 72 hours here on St. Lucia has been the growing hair debate, grooming of students, particularly males, at various learning institutions on the island. We just heard in that Kareem Nelson report from the advocacy group Hairstyle. Joining me now live on the platform to go beyond the headlines on this particular issue, advocacy group member Adex Lava. Adex, thanks for joining me. Nice that you're on. Thanks for coming on.
Thanks for having me this morning.
Even before we go to the hair debate, Adex himself wears a full head of hair. But I know you're very much interested in the last debate that I just concluded, the issue of non-communicable diseases. What say you? You're not a heavy carbs man yourself.
I was watching the report, and again, thanks for having me on this morning. And I was just laughing because I know when I'm in St. Lucia, I mean, we all eat out and we order food, and every time I go, there's just so many carb options, and I don't like carbs, and I don't eat ground provision. So whenever I go to any business place and I order, it's a large salad and a lot of meat, and it's like they kind of like pause and they're like, "You don't want ground provisions? How do you mean you don't want ground provisions?" And it's like, well, just put salad and just put meat. Like, I'm good, that's all I need. And it's like, it's kind of always the same conversation. You sure you're going to pay the same price? You sure you don't want me to put green pig? You sure breadfruit? And it's like, carbs are something that doesn't and hasn't worked for me in large amounts, so I've kind of stayed away from it. So I found it interesting, the conversation you were having before. But
for persons like yourself, a lot of our visitors as well, and some of our citizens, they find it extremely difficult to find healthy options at the restaurants and various outlets. And when you do find it, the healthier options are always excessively expensive.
I think that the mindset needs to change in a particular way, and I think it's not that we don't have a large variety of fresh fruits and vegetables. I think our culture hasn't allowed us to explore what that cooking experience could be with lots of vegetables. So we've been cultured and sort of raised to like eat ground provisions in all its variations, and I think maybe we need to do the same with vegetables in all its variations too, right? And that would allow people to explore and have fun with food. And unless kids and adults are not having fun with it, they just don't know that experience. So for me, I've had the opportunity to travel and obviously see how many ways you can cook an eggplant or play with lettuce. You can barbecue lettuce. Like, these are things we just need to have fun with and explore, and then people will probably eat it more.
Very, very interesting perspective. Let's go down to the meat of the matter that we brought you on now. The growing hair debate on the island. It's not the first time that we're talking about grooming students. We've talked about this for decades. Every school year, the debate comes to the fore again. Firstly, let's talk about Hairstyle, the advocacy group. What's the group all about, and who's behind the group?
So earlier this year, Adam Kadey put out a petition speaking to the matter around ending hair discrimination. And it was in relation to an experience and conversation he had with his daughter. And from there, a number of individuals came together to sort of form a core group to sort of move the issue along from a petition into sort of like a more cohesive conversation to engage the government and to also engage St. Lucians in putting out the stories and getting a sense of, where things are. So a number of us, small group, came together, many members, basically, various ideological backgrounds, but very much committed to the one issue around hair discrimination. We're starting the conversation obviously in schools, but it in no way doesn't mean that does not flow over to the workplace or other things. Right now we're focused on the issue around hair discrimination policies in our school system.
Excellent. You wrote to the Ministry of Education even before the academic year commenced on September 5th. Are you disappointed that you didn't get a response because you were probably preempting them to be proactive in addressing the issue?
Thank you for raising that. I mean, by all means, we tried to preempt this sort of, issue becoming, potentially political or in any way divisive. So we did engage the government over the summer period. And what happened was, I mean, obviously there were other more burning matters or issues. Whether we're disappointed or not, we are at the point of engaging the government. We know this is a national issue with over, unconfirmed reports of more than 30 people sort of being denied, kids denied access across the country. One of the instances obviously has elevated because an individual involved with his children is a lawyer and thankfully is able to navigate the legal system and put some pressure there. So we try to avert it. The ministry is aware of how important this is, and we're awaiting them making an official statement on basically the matter, what happened this week, and obviously engaging us as stakeholders on a way forward.
But what's a fundamental concern here? It's hair. On the other end of it, people say there are rules and guidelines that guide how we operate and where we are at various parts in our life. What's the fundamental concern here from here out?
I mean, from here out, or just from like, if we rationally sit and we think about this, I mean, on the one hand, as you mentioned, I mean, I have a head of hair, but I think as black people, we need to like embrace that our hair is a spiritual experience and can go from being as bald and to as long as we so desire. And that spiritual experience and journey is something we should cherish and hold sacred. And I think through slavery and other ways that our blackness has been taken away from us, we see relics of the colonial past lying around our society, whether in the education system, whether in the government, whether in the workplace. And this is but an example of a way that there is not equality in the types of hair and texture depending on the racial sort of identification that you may have. So you will have, for example, Indians or whites adorning long hair in a particular way and nothing is said. However, our black people, in a country where the majority of persons are black, our experience and cultural experiences, our blackness, are being denied the opportunity to grow our hair, and rules and regulations are placed there historically because it was to isolate and sort of take our blackness away. So we're trying to remove those experiences from as young as possible to allow people to live freely, to be able to express themselves and enjoy that spiritual journey and expression. I think at the end of the day, we need to also recognize that, and I'll just sort of allow me to go here really quickly and I'll try, is that, the conversation happening, rightfully so, in St. Lucia is good. But if you notice, a lot of people talk about in the 1970s, a lot of people are talking about the fact that, well, yeah, we used to wear afros, what changed? The question maybe to put to us also is that back in the 70s, or when people were able to wear afros, who wasn't allowed to wear types of hair that they have? And when you look back, we're a country that oppressed our own people. And when you look back in the 70s and when people had afros, the Rastafarian community was being persecuted by our own people, and policies that are in place now were used against them. So as we evolve, we still need to face our own reckoning that we've oppressed ourselves, and where does it come from, and what rules do we use to do that, and remove them. And this is one of the rules. We shouldn't be asking Rastafarians to cover their hair and others can just walk around as if it's nothing. Interesting perspective, because here we are in 2022 still asking for reparations from the global community for slavery, but in our domain we have oppressed our own people. The conversation is healthy. If indeed we are revisiting the hair policy for schools, should somebody representative of the state and not any political organization or government
first apologize to the Rastafarian community for the wrongs which they have suffered so many decades?
I believe the Prime Minister had an apology earlier this year, and that was in the matter around weed and ganja.
Right.
I think there is a national consciousness, no matter which part of the political divide you're on, that an apology of some sort has come out this year with this new administration. But I think there is consensus that, there will be continuing apologies around the way Rastafarians have been treated and the community. I think that's a given. I think what the government needs to do right now is not hide behind a press release where they said they're going to be reviewing things. Like the Antigua government, as of Monday, experienced something similar to what we went through, and within 24 hours, issued a statement to say they do not accept that, because at the end of the day, the government is funding educational institutions that are under their purview and under their remit. They need to come out strongly and say this will not be accepted, no matter how long it's taking to review it. At the end of the day, too, there are very good examples of ways to have rules, whether legislative or just sort of tacit rules within schools, on how this policy should look. It should not take more than a month to get this sorted and moved on. This is a simple issue. We shouldn't be reviewing this for more than 2 to 3 weeks, to be honest.
Do you know the color
dealt with it, and I think I want to see our government come out and make a strong statement condemning what has happened, because children are being denied. In the absence of us having this conversation, what is happening to the children who are denied access to the schools from Monday? Their right to education has been infringed, and they're at home doing what? Can they go back to school? Do they have to cut their hair? I mean, that's what we're asking people to do, to cut their hair. I mean, I wouldn't be able to go to school.
Now, the example has been set on how quickly Antigua has moved, and there are other best practices, best examples around the region that we can tap into as well. But do you know, Adex, the culture here on St. Lucia, we love to talk. We love the fancy workshops. We like the rhetoric. So I'm on the side that you are. It shouldn't take too long before this review is concluded. But even before that, a strong statement, a strong policy statement needs to happen while the review continues as well.
Yes, I mean, it's okay to have dialogue. It's okay to have conversation, but the government needs to lead on this issue. There's no way, if, ands, or buts. Lead on the issue, set the policy, set the standard, and of course we can have community conversations and bring the public to understand why this should not be happening. But it can happen after the fact. Get our children back to school. Let's remove the racist and colonial rules and regulations that sit in place, and then go into a public campaign of raising the awareness of why this was so important. That can happen in that order. To do it the other way means it's not going to change, because now persons are going to, with power, privilege, and position, try to stymie the conversation to say what should be allowed or not. And what happened in the past was that we got to a point where, if we recall, it was like, okay, we'll allow Rastafarians to be able to come and express and adorn their spirituality in school, but we're going to ask them to cover it. We're not tolerating this kind of compromise anymore as black people. We want the policy gone.
Well, what was telling for me in the press statement from the Ministry of Education, good, but convenient, I thought, Adex, they promised wide consultation. That could take a while. I thought it was very convenient that we now.
I'm going to touch on this outside of my my role as hairstyle. I'm going to speak to this primarily as what I've observed over successive administrations. They hide behind press releases, and that press release that came out from the communications arm of whatever ministry is ever but reflective of the way that government is unable to deal with issues that are of national consequence, and they put out something that has no teeth, no substance, and it just gets shelved away and goes on. So this is not new to this administration or the government or previous administrations. The last 10 years, we've noticed the way the government is able to just issue a press release and say, yeah, we're handling it. No, not this one. At least for Hear Us Out, and I think for the national conversation, I think people are on gaze looking at it, and we're going to be expecting action right now.
Let's talk Let's talk about the impact on the students who've come from difficult COVID-19 period. They lost a lot of hours. When they're sent back and denied entry into school, their parents are at work, they're not being supervised, but it's even a greater blow being dealt to their education as well.
I mean, and it's a blow, yes, it's a blow also to the psyche of a child. What message are we sending to a child that they're so different because of their hair that grows out naturally, and they can see the difference in their friends and other persons around, that they need to stay home, that they are denied access because of something so powerful as their hair? The other thing around it is, I mean, having earlier this year become part of this group and having conversations with members and other parents coming forward, you start to really see that the injustices that have happened to other parents and their children, where their children were taken to the barber and their hair cut without their parents' consent. You have children who were denied entry, had to go home, cut their hair, part of the Rastafarian community, and just have to bow down and get over it and know that the priority is obviously their child's education. But what happens is there is now a self-hating deprecation that happens now. The child starts to be damaged at an early age in that sense, because their ability to express and identify themselves is now being chipped away. And that's not where we want to have conversations with children. That's a dangerous thing to do. The ability to keep a child happy should be of tantamount sort of importance to as a society. And to walk someone to school, bring them to school, in the instance that obviously went to the court, two brothers, you're ripping families apart, you're ripping spirituality apart, you're ripping conversations of freedom and emancipation from an early age there apart. And to be honest, we don't have time for that. And I think what is interesting is that a vast number of the infractions that are happening and the injustices are happening in schools that claim to be for the elite, are part of this Catholic framework of thinking, you know, and the solution many people are giving, well, the rules are rules, and if you want to go to that good school, then accept the rules, move on. And that's not the solution. This is a publicly funded school education system that should be accessible to all. The solution shouldn't be pick up your child and go to a private school. I think the other thing to sort of think about is that this is but an example of the changing world we live in. What is acceptable, what is no longer unconventional, and this is a way of society, of us trying to bring us into the modern world of understanding that some of these colonial relics, ways of thinkings, and modes of rules need to be abolished. Look at the House of Parliament. We're asking women to cover their hair when they go into the House of Parliament. I mean, what nonsense is that? Think about it. Where did it come from? Lawyers used to wear the white papicho on their head and used to adorn this robe. All of these things are colonial relics and symbols that we've taken on without asking why, and removing or putting in place our own traditional ways of thinking about it. And that's what's important. It's okay to have adorned that and taken it with us, but it's time to move on and put in our own ways of being Black, St. Lucian, Caribbean, however you think about it. It's now time to remove those things and move on from it. We're tired of it.
So much evidence throughout our communities of the colonial history that we still cling on to, yet we say Adex that we are independent as a nation. Really not so. In the interim, while the discussion continues, the students who have been denied access, they should be allowed with immediacy to get back into the classrooms and to continue their education.
We absolutely support that message, and in all ways possible, those students who are being returned to their educational right should not be in any way identified or placed to seem different than the student body. They should not be placed in any way to further infringe or encumber who they are as individuals, because that's another human rights abuse. They should be allowed to come into school and no conversation should be brought or any changes around their hair as the ministry sets policy and moves past this right away.
Finally, from me, Adex, the current policy, it appears like it overrides the Constitution of St. Lucia, which guarantees one freedom of association and a right to choose.
Interesting you would bring that up. For me, my sanity and my sanctity in this body that I walk in and what I do with it overrides the Constitution. But that's me. But if we're talking about law, policies, rules and regulations, the highest law and standard in the land is the Constitution. So this rule, if it infringes the Constitution, the laws of the land, it's deemed unconstitutional. Sometimes on its face value, by mere implementation of it, but it's going to court. The individual has taken the opportunity to take this through the court system, and this is by all means not the first time it's going through the court system. But make no mistake, this is an unconstitutional rule, and it will be struck down. It's been struck down in various other jurisdictions, and I don't see it not being struck down in the OECS region and court system quite soon.
Adex, Lava, interesting perspective always. Thank you for engaging us. Thanks for your time.
Thank you so much for having me this early in the morning.
Thanks for waking up early. Adex Lache, he's a member of the advocacy group Hear Us Out. They're raising their voice on the growing hair debate on the island. He's saying that the current policy is unconstitutional and they expect it to be taken off the books, taken off the policy of the Ministry of Education in very short stead. The discussion continues. You can join it on the platform. Share your ideas, share your concerns and your recommendations as well. And we will entertain a few calls when we return from this next commercial break. 450-0777, our in-studio number. The hair debate continues to grow on St. Lucia. Our time just about 18.5 minutes before 9 o'clock. We conclude on top of the hour. Before we go, we will hear from Coach Darren Sami. His St. Lucia Kings, they were victorious last evening at the Darren Sami Cricket Ground in a match against the Jamaica Tallowers. They're in action again this evening, so we'll hear from Coach Sami. Somebody on the Facebook Live was also asking about the numbers at the stadium last evening. We'll try to give you some insight on that, so stay with us. We'll take a short commercial break. There's lots still to come right here on your morning cup of tea. Good morning.